Hello, Classics fans. We are back, and we are going to be discussing books 2 and 4, and maybe if I don't get too gabby, a couple of episodes in book 6 as well. Um, okay, uh, so let's get started. Um, when we left off, of course, was book 1 of the Aeneid, with Aeneas having just landed in Carthage and um, he runs into his mom, who um, points him in the direction of this new city. So it's called Libya, the general region, but the city they're building is called Carthage, and she gives him the +2 cloak of invisibility, and he goes off and wanders off to Carthage, and he winds up in this uh, temple that's under construction. It's a temple to Juno. Dun dun dun. Remember, Juno tried to kill Aeneas in book 1, and she hates him simply because he is a Trojan. She wants Troy completely gone forever. Total genocide of the Trojans, because Paris chose Aphrodite and not her in the beauty contest. So when Aeneas goes into the temple of Juno, I think we're supposed to be a bit suspicious, or a bit nervous, is probably a better word, because we know that Juno hates Aeneas, and that therefore this is not the best place for him to be. Problem is, Jupiter's already announced in book 1 that Aeneas is going to reach his destiny in Italy and found the city, and have many descendants, and those descendants will found the city of Rome, and Rome will be the greatest empire that the world has ever seen. And so, whatever suspense there is with him going into the temple of Juno is minimized by that. And then there's also the fact that as Aeneas looks around him, so here we see Virgil borrowing a technique from Homer, the ekphrasis, right, the depiction of the work of art inside the other work of art. These descriptions of these panels, sculptures along the wall that depict scenes from the Trojan War. Why the Carthaginians would be interested in depicting scenes from the Trojan War is an open question. But anyway, as Aeneas looks around, he sees himself and he thinks, oh, well, they already know who I am, so I'll be safe here. And then the last of these panels, the last of these sculptures, depicts a scene from the Iliad in which the queen of the Amazons, fight on the side of the Trojans. And the Amazons are, in myth, a matriarchal society, which doesn't stop them from being fearsome warriors. So in the Amazonian society, for Amazons, let's see if I can find this. No, I must have put it in the other room. They're an exact mirror image to the way almost every Mediterranean society was structured, which is that the men are in charge, the men do the fighting, and the women stay at home and are there. I don't want to be crass about it or oversimplify it, but they're there for breeding purposes, basically making more babies. But the Amazons represent the mirror image of that, in which the women are on top and the men are kept as at this basically the same status as women. We saw the portrayal of women in the Iliad, right, where they're often treated simply as property or slaves. So in the Amazon society, women, like I said, rule, and the men are kept as, for breeding. So it's the exact opposite. So when you think about this in the larger context of myth, I know I'm getting a little away from the Aeneid itself right now, but when you think about this in the larger context of myth, this is an obvious example of something I mentioned, I think I mentioned in the last lecture, which is the construction of the other. The other is that thing that possesses all those qualities, usually negative, that we don't. You know, we have this skin color, they have that skin color. Our men rule here, their women rule over there. We have democracy over here. They have, a monarch descending through the queen over there. So everything that can be, made into the opposite. This is what we refer to when we talk about othering. So the Amazons are stereotyped, but at the same time, in myth, they're also very fearsome warriors. So there's respect on that front because of the value put on military success and military prowess. So this is all by way of explaining. I'm setting something up here, okay? That's not just a digression. So as he's looking at these panels, just as he's looking at this scene that represents the Queen of the Amazons coming into battle, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time not finishing that myth, but she ends up falling in love with Achilles, and Achilles ends up killing her on the battlefield. That's what happens. Okay, so, but the last panel that Aeneas is looking at is the scene of her coming on, her name is Penthesilea, coming onto the battlefield. And as soon as he looks at that scene, the very next thing that Virgil describes in the text is the Queen of Carthage, Dido, who enters the room. So the thematic effect of this is that we transfer what we think about with respect to the Queen of the Amazons automatically, residually, that gets placed onto Dido, who is the Queen of Carthage. And then, as soon as Dido is introduced, and Virgil, again in the text, says that she's followed by a horde of men or a throng of men. So men following a woman, again, presents notions of authority, but also notions that run contrary to Roman social values. Rome is not a matriarchy by any stretch of the imagination, which is, actually in ancient Rome, women tended to have more political influence than women in Greek society did. In many instances, even Augustus's own wife, remember, Virgil is writing the Aeneid under the reign of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Augustus's own wife was undoubtedly responsible for, I don't even know how many, but many laws and political actions in ancient Rome. See, Augustus was a well-known workaholic. As a younger man, when he was still Octavian, he was known to be more of a bro, for want of a better term. And but when he came to his maturity and when it came time for him to take his political responsibilities on, he did a complete 180, where he turned into this. He wanted to present himself as a model of traditional Roman moral value, or just in general traditional Roman values. Okay, so this was his PR in Rome. His PR in the foreign places was a bit different, because of course PR has to be tailored to the local community. So no surprise there. But Augustus turned himself into this. He wanted to turn himself into this model of. The Romans had a word for it. Virtus. You might recognize that. as the root of our English word virtue. So he wanted to be the model of virtue, and so uh, he there's a million things he did. I'm not going to test you on, not a million literally, but you see what I'm saying. Uh, he cleaned up the Senate. He did his best to clean up um, the morality of the city itself. In this respect, you can think of Rudy Giuliani pre 9/11 in New York City. Um, I won't get started on that. But if you either know or you don't, so he put in restrictions on number of senators and on how much purple they could have on their toga, and just did a general kind of cleanup of the city from the standpoint of. So okay, let me back up here for a second. So what are traditional Roman virtues? Well, we're talking. Remember, I told you last class that the Roman society is divided into three classes. You've got the patrician class. They're what we would nowadays call the 1%. Then you've got the equites, people who make enough money every year to be able to own and equip a horse. Traditionally, later it just becomes income, net worth. But don't think of these people as a middle class. They're like lower upper class. So we all know what the upper middle class is in America, but for Rome, this is more like the lower upper class. And the ambition for the equites, of course, is to spend their wealth so that they can become patricians, because it was a wealth qualification. This is important because only patricians could hold the highest political offices. So a lot of aspiration, right? And then everybody else, the other 97%, 95%, belonged to a class called the plebeians. So I don't think I probably need to go into too much detail on this, but and I'm sure this won't surprise any of you, because we all know how wealth and influence goes. But our ideas about ancient Roman society is shaped by the outlooks, opinions, and writings of the patrician class, almost without exception. There are a few interesting exceptions, but even when if you make it, if you're born a plebeian but you still manage to make it on the literary or philosophical scene, you kind of immediately adapt this upper class outlook on life, right? So what is this upper class outlook on life? Well, central to this is the father figure, the pater. I talked about this last time with Aeneid, and respect and obedience to the pater. Maybe that it's an overstatement to call that the most important facet to it, but it's definitely right in the middle of it. Simplicity is another virtue. The ideal is to, and I'll get more into detail on this in the next lecture when we talk about the philosophy of Stoicism. But the ideal has become that you live as simply as possible, because more money, more problems, right? So you want to live as simply as possible. The less you want, the less you desire, the less you're going to be unhappy. Okay, because unhappiness is caused by not getting what you want. I've just blown up my spot on Stoicism, but I'll still explain it next time. So simplicity of life, simplicity of your consumption. Your food is supposed to be ideally very simple food, beans and lentils and whatever you can, basically what I'm getting at here is whatever you can raise for yourself on the lands that you own. Okay, so that's the patrician ideal in life. Problem is, only patricians own land. So this is again a very top-down kind of social analysis that I'm giving you here. There are accounts of like street life in Rome, which are fascinating to read. But a lot of those are written by patricians who were slumming it, because poor is cool. That's the sort of simplicity, and that simplicitas is actually the Latin word for it. But that's the kind of simplicity that you're supposed to strive for. But because there's Rome, the city of Rome, right? You own land out in the countryside around Rome, but there's this big city with all these plebeians who are just too dumb to take care of themselves. So it's your moral duty to set aside your simple life on your estate and go to where you can, which is not going to shut down if you leave because you have slaves are going to keep it running. You go to the city of Rome and you take on your public responsibility, right? So public office is presented as a sacred duty in ancient Rome, which receives way much less, or I should say less. Broke my own grammar law. Receives no, actually less was right. I'm always confused with less versus fewer, but in this case, I think less is right. So the emphasis on the sacredness of the office we find far less emphasized in certainly in the accounts of Athenian democracy that have come down to. I'm not saying it wasn't there; it was definitely there, because remember the cities themselves are founded by. They have patron goddesses. Athens was Poseidon and Athena. Rome's is Venus, oddly enough, for a city that prides itself on its virtue. And who's shit? I can't think of the other one now. They had a second one. It might have been Mars. All right. If I don't think about it, it'll come to me. Okay, so this, God, now I went right down the myth hole. Actually, the history hole in this case. Talking about Roman virtue. Oh, right. Okay. So, all right. So let me just hit the reset button here real quick and talk about Dido and her entrance into the city, because I know I started talking about matriarchy versus patriarchy and otherizing, and how the Romans conceived of themselves and Augustus. All right, that's how I got there. So let's go back to Dido entering the temple. There's Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons. We're looking at her. Then here's Dido. Now all of a sudden we're looking at her. So what we were just thinking is still in your mind. So there's a transfer, right? So we know we established right off the bat Dido's bona fides as a queen. And we also transfer what we remember from the Iliad onto Dido in terms of her ability to lead and her ability to fight. So we got Dido, and then immediately after we see Dido walk in with this bunch of men following her, Virgil provides us with a simile. Okay, so here's another Homeric technique that I should say that Virgil borrows from Homer, right? So just as we saw similes in Homer, so we also see them in Virgil. So in this particular simile, to whom does Virgil compare Dido? He compares her to Diana. Who is Diana? Diana's Greek equivalent is Artemis. So what is she associated with? She's associated with, there are for the Romans and Diana, there are three primary associations that I'm going to focus on here. One is she associated with hunting, because that's her traditional role throughout Greco-Roman myth, right? She's also hand in hand with her role being associated with hunting is she is one of three goddesses given special permission by Zeus to not ever have to have sex or to marry in many of the myths, but basically they're allowed to remain virgins. Okay, there are reasons for that. Take myth if you want to know. So she's associated with hunting. She's associated with hunting, and she's associated with chastity, or virginity, or being chaste. Okay, and then the third one, and this is one that's going to have to wait a minute before I discuss it more fully. She's associated with the moon, because traditionally in myth, her brother is Apollo. So if Apollo, the ideal of male, how can I put this? Early masculinity, just coming into its ripeness. That's one of Apollo's in cult. That's one of Apollo's primary associations. He's just he's the ideal young man. He's the first round draft pick, if you want to think of it that way. But at the same time, he's also finished 2 degrees in a medical school, so he's like the ideal of masculinity. And so therefore, it's sort of psychologically logical that his sister would then be associated with the moon. So, but Artemis is also, she's the female counterpart. I said Artemis, I should say Diana, because I want you to know the Roman names when we're talking about the Roman text. So she's also, amongst other attributes, associated with a woman coming into, a young girl becoming a woman. So Apollo writes passage for men, Diana writes passage for women. Okay. So what do we do now? We've got from the ekphrasis, we've got Dido as queen, like an Amazon, leader of men. Diana, hunting, and also chaste, sexually, in Dido's case, of course, sexually restrained. Because Dido took a vow of chastity after her first husband died and swore never to be with another man again. Uh-oh. You can already feel the tension building. Right, and of course we'll see Dido on the hunting trip later when we get to book 4. So that's the introduction of Dido, and it sets up book 2, because Virgil he doesn't just use like poetic techniques from Homer. He also wants us to view this in the lens of the Homeric world. So things like hospitality are really important. Now, by the time Virgil's writing, Rome's pushing 1 million in terms of its population, just the city. As we all know, in overcrowded cities, people are possessive of their personal space. I know we would all like to be hospitable right now at this point in time. So hospitality is not really part of core Roman social practice. But we're supposed to be thinking about, Aeneas as an equivalent to Achilles. We're supposed to be thinking about these people being on the same par with the heroes of Homer. So Dido, of course, extends hospitality to Aeneas, and that's our transition into book 2, because, of course, the first act of hospitality is you eat. So she throws a big feast, and after they eat, Dido says, "Tell us your story. Tell us what happened at Troy." So they knew enough about Troy to make carvings of it, but they don't know enough about Troy that they don't know how it was destroyed. Okay, very convenient. And Aeneas says, "Oh, I couldn't possibly tell it. It's too full of sorrow. But here I go. And then he speaks for the next 4 hours. And this is our fullest account of the Trojan Horse episode. It's not. We know that the account of the Trojan Horse, there were accounts of the Trojan Horse in which Virgil would have had access to, that go back, probably about 800 years before Virgil was even writing the original parts of the Greek epic cycle that would have told this. And there's a really short account of it in the Odyssey. Odysseus talks about it, but not to the extent that you would think, at least in my opinion. And then there are other adaptations and retellings of it over time. But in terms of like the way that we think of the Trojan Horse myth, we're getting that from Virgil primarily. And that's how the Greeks take the city. You'll know if you've read it. They trick the Romans, the Trojans. That is not a Freudian slip, because we are supposed to think that Trojans and Romans are one continuity, because Aeneas's kids are the forefathers of the Romans. So it's a continuous line. So he tells the story, right, of the Trojan horse. I'm not going to narrate every little detail about it. There's some very famous parts of it. The priest Laocoon. So the Greeks build this big. I'm not going to narrate every part of it. We have to get on to other things. If you read it, you read it. Laocoon is the priest who doubts that this horse is a sacred object, so he throws a spear in it, and then 2 snakes come out of the sea and eat him and his sons, and then they slither off and take shelter in the shrine to Minerva. Minerva is the equivalent to Athena. So that's a tip-off. If you're sharp on myth, that's a tip-off. Because Athena, of course, is on the side of the Greeks, on the side of the Trojans. So she's engaging in some of her cleverness in this way. So the Trojans are like, oh, it's a holy object, let's bring it into the city. They bring it into the city, the Greeks come out, they slaughter everybody, so on and so forth. What does Virgil want us to take away from this episode? Well, the first thing he wants us to see is that the Greeks are liars. That they had to cheat to win. There's a passage where Virgil says, neither Diomedes or Achilles, nor all of the 1,000 ships that they brought with us could beat us. But rather they had to fall back on trickery in order to win. And he also calls them natural-born actors. Makes reference to the stagecraft of Achaia. Now, this is an interesting thing and a good insight into Roman patrician moral self-conception. They thought that the theater was a potentially morally corrupting influence. So they allowed for performances. And normally almost invariably, except for the clown shows, the mime shows and stuff like that, the stage performances were adaptations of Greek plays, right? There is only one tragedy from Roman authors that is not based on a Greek play. It's not that much it survives, but so now we get back into, okay. So, let me just hold this up real quick so you can see what I wrote. So the Greeks are liars, they had to cheat to win, and they're natural-born actors, right? That's how the Romans Trojans, how because remember the Trojans are going to when we read when we read the word Trojan in the Aeneid, what we're really supposed to see is Roman, right? And when we read the name Aeneas in the Aeneid, what we're really supposed to hear is the name Augustus. I'll get more into that down the road. Okay, so the Trojans, they're pious people. So when the snakes come out and kill Alcuin, they think, oh, the gods punished him, so let's drag the thing in. Greeks come out, liars, cheat to win, actors. What about the Trojans? The Trojans themselves are pious. Or, well, I'm going to use the Latin term here because I'm going to come back to this term when we discuss Stoicism in the next lecture. But this word is pius, right? And the reason why I use the Latin term as opposed to the English word, when I give you vocabulary when I give you vocabulary from Greek or when I give you vocabulary from Latin, it's not to punish you, and it's not to just make you sound smart at parties. Um, um, uh, Though I don't know what kind of parties you go to where you'd be using Greek or Latin terms, but you might find yourself, in a shotgun shack. So when we use the English word pious, what we mean and what that word means in the English language is pretty much limited just to religious piety. You don't really use it outside of so when we say someone's pious, what we mean by that in English is that they are very meticulous in in performing their religious observances, right? That's what piety means. That's what it means when we call somebody pious. We don't say so and so is a pious student, or your mechanic is a pious mechanic, even though they may show the same meticulousness in those activities. So when we use the English word pious, it's got a narrow meaning. The Roman conception of pious is the adjective. Pietas is the noun. So when we talk about pietas, there are two fundamental factors involved in here in pietas. I'm actually going to shelve those for the next lecture. But of course, again, remember I mentioned earlier about respect and obedience to the Father. That's part of pietas. Okay, and so pietas as a noun, or pious as the adjective, had a broader meaning sense, right? It meant doing your public duty. It meant doing your family duty. It meant doing your religious duties as well. So, the Greeks are cheating. They have to cheat to win. Meanwhile, Aeneas, of course, is a totally pious actor. First of all, he's asleep as the fight is going on, because Aeneas sleeps really well because he has a very calm mind. He's not worried about anything. So he's a pretty sound sleeper. This won't be the last time we see this. Actually, we'll see it in book 4, which I hope to get to in 7 minutes. But Hector comes to him in a dream, right? Hector appears in this syndrome. When Hector shows up in Aeneas' dream, he's all cut up and bloodied. And he says, "Wake up, Aeneas, the city's under attack." Actually, no, that's not what he says. He says, he does. He says, "Wake up, Aeneas, the city's being destroyed." He says, "You need to leave the city." He says, "If the city could have been saved by anyone, it would have been me." So we're fated, or it's our destiny. And I talk about destiny already. I know I did in the last lecture. So it's your destiny to leave the city, go to another place, found this glorious thing that will become Rome. Okay, so but still Aeneas, feels his obligation, um, uh, which is part of pietas as well, doing your duty, um, to defend his city, right? And goes out and he fights. First, he tries to cheat to like countermand the Greeks' cheating tactics. So he finds a dead Greek and steals his armor and puts it on, so he thinks the Greeks will think he's a Greek. But then he soon finds out that he's under attack from all of the Trojans in the cities, so he quickly realizes that cheating is not a winning strategy. So remember that for your final exams. Whatever form they may take, I don't want a million emails about it. I haven't decided yet. But then he, goes off, and then of course there's the scene with Achilles' son, Pyrrhus, or Neoptolemus. Virgil, even though he's doing literary epic, steals from the oral epic in keeping two names for a lot of characters in reserve, so that he can fit them in different places metrically within the line. Talked about that way back with Homer. Achilles sees, Aeneas sees Achilles' son, Neoptolemus or Pyrrhus, kill Priam at an altar. So you got this young dude who only got in the city because he cheated to get in, slaughtering this helpless old man who's doing his valiant. They put his armor on, and he's like, at this stage, geez, how old would like if we imagine it, man, it's got to be, I don't know, old. And but the worst thing is he does it right at the altar, right? So the slaughter of the father figure, or in this instance, grandfather figure, being slaughtered right at the altar means the Greeks are totally the opposite of the pious Trojans. So Aeneas returns to his home. Says, his mom, mom helps out again, of course. And she, puts on his, virtual reality glasses so that he can see that it's not the Greeks destroying the city, but it's the gods' decision to destroy Troy. So he realizes that, it's futile to battle against the gods. So he goes back home. They're having this debate. His dad, Anchises, does not want to leave. Anchises points out that a hero fights even until death. A hero defends the city even if it means his death. But then they receive divine signs. They receive, omens. First, Aeolus' head looks like it's on fire, and they all panic and dump water on him. But then they're like, hey, he's not burned. And that was weird. And then they say, maybe that was a sign from the gods. Gods, can we have another sign? And there's a lightning strike immediately. So they realize that it's the gods' will. So they leave the city. So you've got, as they leave the city, one thing that's important to look at, and there's actually a really famous statue of this. If I didn't suck so hard at virtual technology, I would have given you a link to it, but you can look it up. As they leave the city, they leave with Aeneas, his son Aeolus. Gee, what could that name be a reference to? Aeolus. And he's leading him by the hand as they go out. And then on Aeneas' shoulder is his dad, Anchises. And as they leave, Anchises grabs and carries out with him these little idols. They're little miniature statues. I'll come back to them in just a second. I put that in his wrong. I put that in his left hand. That's a bad omen. By ritual rules, I should have to start this whole drawing over, but I'm not going to. Okay. So let me X this out. Okay. So these are called household gods. You'll recognize them in the text because they're sometimes referred to as ancestral gods, but because our translator wants to also be able to write in hexameter, he sometimes uses the Latin names, which are Lares or Penates. So, Lares, Penates, household gods, ancestral gods, they all refer to the same thing. What are they? That you would have in the typical Roman home. You would have, I left one of the most important ones out here. Also called hearth gods. Note there is an H at the end of this word. Hearth gods. What is the hearth? The hearth is the area around the fireplace. Going back, not necessarily in the architecture in patrician architecture of the imperial period, but going back into the early republic period, the fireplace would always be centrally located in the home. So it was constant activity around the fireplace on a daily basis. Had to keep the fire burning 24/7. Can't let it go out. Freeze to death at night if it goes out. Obviously, the obvious uses for fire, like cooking. You would, and even the smoke was useful in the house. One way of, certainly like preserving food for one thing, but it also acts as a preservative on wooden objects too, because they're not Teflon coated, so they're subject to various aspects of decay. So as you go back in the centuries, symbolically the hearth becomes. Again, the hearth is the area that surrounds the fireplace, the fire itself. It becomes a place that represents prosperity, survival, and family unity. Or I should say, the family unit, which is different from family unity, but the family unit. Okay, so it's speculated. We don't know for sure because the Romans managed to destroy all the evidence that might tell us this later. But it's speculated that that this is adapted from an earlier culture called the Etruscans, who practiced ancestor worship. As still cultures today practice ancestor worship. I've been in many people's houses where there's an area, for great grandma, grandma, great uncle, and sometimes you actually in some places and in some homes you leave offerings for them. This is a Buddhist practice. This is a Taoist practice. So probably the household gods, that's probably their origins. I keep using the word probably, and I do it on purpose because I don't want any rando watching this and blowing me up in the comment section. But it's a part of so this is not a part. Remember, so let me just point out, this is not a part of the Greek religious practice. I mean, I'm quite sure they had their forms of respect to their ancestors. I can actually think of a couple of them, but that's a digression, so I won't go into it. But not to the extent that the Romans emphasized it. You actually had a shrine. Okay, so over time, it kind of moves away from worship of specific ancestors into spirits that represent the protection of your family specifically. So they're seen as spirits. So they represent the spirits of all your ancestors, not just anyone. That's a better way to put it. They represent the collective force of all of your ancestors, who are, in theory at least, well disposed to their family line continuing. So what is this all about? Well, look at this. Look at the arrangement that they leave by which they leave. So you got Aeneas. Aeneas is Aeolus' father. So what's Aeneas doing? He's guiding and directing his son. He's acting as a pious father. At the same time he's doing that, he's carrying his own father. So in addition to behaving like the pious father, he's also demonstrating that he's a pious son by supporting, obeying his father. And then Anchises carrying the Lares brings with it overtones of descent, family descent. He's carrying all of his father figures. So this is about the line of descent, and it's also at the same time about the line of destiny, because the Lares are now divine figures. So they're guiding, Anchises is guiding Aeneas, is guiding Aeolus. You might notice, however, there is one figure missing from this picture. So this picture is all about emphasizing the importance of of respect for and obedience to the pater, and the pater's duty, his pietas, is in disciplining, directing, and guiding his son, so that his son also becomes pious. So what's missing from the picture? Mom. Where is she? I think my pen's too fat to do this well. She's back here, carrying the pots and pans. She's like, hey, wait up. Wait for me. That's hair on her head. It looks like a duck now on the screen. It's supposed to be hair. Oh, now it looks like an evil demon, which Virgil would probably like. But she's trying to chase him down because she gets left behind by all of this. And in the end, so Aeneas they get out of the city, they escape safely. And then they're like, oh, where's Creusa? I don't know. Well, Aeneas is like, I'll go back and look for her. So he goes back in the city to look for her, but he doesn't find her. But he does find her ghost, her spirit, who proceeds to tell him that I'm in a better place now. Don't worry about me. Go off and find yourself a new wife and follow your path of destiny. Right? So you can see how Virgil hammers this theme of Aeneas and destiny time and time again. Right? How convenient for Aeneas. Right? Like Creusa says, I'm with the blessed spirits now. So I guess. But you can see the emphasis on the patriarchy here, for sure, in Virgil's portrayal. And that's it for book. That's all I have to talk about with book 2, I think. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Okay. So that's book 2, and then so let's switch off into book 4 now, of course, because Aeneas is Aeneas, and such a... Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't wrap this discussion up. This discussion about the Greeks and Trojans. Okay, so when we look at Virgil, when we look at the Aeneid in a broader text, one of I'm going to identify 3 things here, or 4 things. So I'll just stick with these 3 for now. So one thing, and I've already talked a bit about this already, so I won't dwell on too long, is Homer, the influence of Homer. Virgil wants to be seen as the next. He wants to be seen, I want is probably the wrong word. Let me give Virgil some credit here. He's aspiring to be seen as Rome's Homer. It's the whole. Well, it's not the whole point, but it's a large part of the point of him choosing this subject material and writing in this genre, right? Just as Homer became the defining cultural text for the Greeks, Virgil is striving to give the newly birthed empire a defining cultural work. So he's obviously using dactylic hexameter. He's writing in hexameters. He's continuing Homer's storyline. He's filling in maybe a gap or two here in Homer's story. He's borrowing techniques from Homer, I've already discussed, ekphrasis, simile, those things. So, yeah. Roman history is another thing. Virgil's, I'll talk more about this in a minute when we get to book 4. And then we have this other concept, which is patronage. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I will return to it. You can, yeah, okay. I'll come back to that. Let me get back here. So, come back to here. So why is it important for Virgil, why is it important for Virgil that we see the Greeks as liars and cheaters and actors? Those despicable actors. And to see the Trojans as pious and pious. Because obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the Romans, when we hear the word Trojan, we hear the echo of the word Romans. If Virgil presented the Greeks winning the Trojan War fair and square, or if he had presented the Trojans as in some way inferior to the Greeks morally, we'd have a thematic problem here, because then we would have the Romans, who are super moral, being descended from either a defeated nation or a immoral people. Nation's the wrong word. People, right? So, because again, I'll just repeat that point here. Because Virgil's giving us this version of the myth in which the Romans are directly descended from the Trojans, one Trojan in particular, Trojan man, Aeneas. It's important, and because there's this emphasis on paternity, right? Your moral character is shaped by your father's moral character, which is shaped by his father's moral character, which is shaped by his father, all the way back. So it's important that thematically we accept that the Romans were not defeated fair and square. They were jumped, right? They were jumped by the Greeks. They were jumped by the gods. And they lost, but the whole reason they lost was so that Aeneas could get out and find his destiny and become the father of a line of descendants who would turn into the greatest empire the world has ever seen, the Romans. So we don't like the Greeks, boo Greeks, but we do like the Trojans. Okay? Golf club, polite club. You have to be modest. At least at this stage in the Roman Empire. That will change over time, I'm sure, as some of you already are aware of. Okay, so let's skip ahead to book 4. I'm going to try to wrap this up within the next 22 minutes. It's probably not the number you wanted to hear. Okay, so again, what happened? Okay, so I'm just going to skirt through so I don't get caught up and repeat it later. I'm just going to skirt through what happens in book 4. Dido falls in love with Aeneas, fights it off. Her sister convinces her, and then behind the scenes, Juno and Venus, odd couple if there ever was one. Juno wants Aeneas destroyed. Venus is the goddess of lust, so she's just, trying to turn him out. They agree that they'll do this love pact, and so they go out and they get together and they do it on a hunting expedition. Remember Diana, the huntress. Um, and then Aeneas kind of like, um, becomes a bit whipped, uh, and starts wearing Carthaginian clothes, starts helping to oversee the construction of Carthage, and eventually is directed by the gods to leave the city, and then at the end Dido kills herself, falls on Aeneas' sword. Okay, so what's going on in this book? Well, we come back here to Roman history. What this book is doing is making an allusion, Allusion, an allusion to a series of wars that in history, in actual history, had been fought between Rome and the historical city of Carthage. Okay, three of them they fought. The first one was 264 to 241. Second one, which is the most famous one, the one that you're most likely to have, if you have knowledge of these things, to know anything about, started in 218 and ended in 201. Both the first and second ended in total stalemates. And then the last one was the last one, which was decisive, was 149 to 146, and ended in Rome, completely destroying Carthage. Okay, so what's going on with this Dido and Aeneas myth thing here? With Dido, the queen of Carthage, and Aeneas, the now at this stage, he's basically the king of Troy. Not that there's many Trojans left, but it's a royal, and also he's the son of a goddess. Let's not forget Anchises and Venus. All right. Okay, real quick. Here's the myth behind this. Zeus got pissed off that I'm going to use the Greek names here because our best source is a Greek source. Zeus got pissed off that Aphrodite was running around making every other person fall in love and make fools of themselves, every other god fall and make fools of themselves. So he decided that what he was going to do was make her fall in love with a mortal, and that mortal happened to be Anchises. And they did it, and she gave birth, and that's Aeneas. So there you go. But of course, Venus is back off to her abode, which in Roman myth is not Mount Olympus, but is actually, in fact, the Milky Way. There's another myth behind that. I'm getting lost. Let me pick up the pace here. Okay. So, they set up Aeneas and Dido, and like I said, Dido becomes, as Mercury will call him later in the book, a tame husband. You let your wife rule you, is basically what he's saying. And but there's a few interesting things that I want to in this whole episode. So you can see that in terms of the theme of Roman history, this is symbolically about Rome destroying Carthage, right? It's an unnatural relationship between Dido and Aeneas. Why is it an unnatural relationship? Well, first of all, Roman Trojans are pious, right? Whereas Diana has taken this oath of chastity. So she's sworn a sacred oath. So when they go off to the cave, and I'm going to talk about that real quick in just a second, but when they go off to that cave, that puts her in the category of having violated her pietas. She can't be thought of as pious anymore, because she swore a sacred oath of loyalty and obedience to her husband, even though her husband is dead. Don't worry, he'll come back in book 6. Sort of. So it's her fault is one thing, and I'm just going to go over a couple of things real quickly here. I'm going to reference them, and I would like you to go back in the text and look at them. So when you find the passage, the cave passage where Dido and Aeneas first, have sex, If you look right before that, you'll see two descriptive passages. You'll see a descriptive passage of Dido, and then you'll see a descriptive passage of Dido, and then you'll see another descriptive passage of Aeneas. And it's worth looking at those, right? Because one thing Virgil does is he focuses on clothes. He does this often. Because Virgil's a city guy, and although really he'd rather be at his country estate, and often was. But he's writing for an urban audience, right? And clothes matter in a city. They're indicators, as we all know, living in New York. They're indicators of. They tell you things about other people. So he does this frequently. Like he did it with Aeneas's mom back in book 1 in her miniskirt, and he does it again here with Dido. So it's interesting to look at those two passages and just figure out what is going on thematically there. And then you have the scene in the cave where Virgil starts out by kind of implying that it's a marriage. It's a legitimate marriage. He says there were torches and hymns sung and there were witnesses. All of the things that a Roman would recognize. It's as if we said there was rice thrown, and at least in the Christian or Catholic tradition, but hymns sung. I'm quite sure hymns are sung in every tradition. And so it kind of implies it, but then he does a complete 180, like 3 or 4 lines later. And he says Dido didn't worry about calling it marriage, but under that name she hid her sin. What's her sin? She broke her vow of chastity. So even though we can think about Aeneas in this instance as acting in kind of unvirtuous ways, he's off the hook. Just as he was off the hook in book 2. What would you expect a hero to do as their city is attacked? You would expect a hero, a hero out of the Iliad, like Hector, shall we say, for one, and even Paris, to stay and defend their city. Even Paris doesn't run away. He's lazy and reticent and not unreliable, but he gets killed in the gates of Troy. So he's there when he's still there fighting and defending, like even if we don't think most highly of him. So, like Aeneas, what, you're running away? Like, what's going on here, right? But Hector has given him permission to run away. Remember, we talked about the dream a second ago. So Hector came and told him, it's okay, like not only is it okay for you to go, but you need to go because your destiny lies elsewhere and your descendants are going to be greater than everybody who ever lived. And so this is like a get out of jail free card, right? So, and then there's another one at the end of book 2 when Creusa says, "Oh, go off, find yourself a new wife." It's another get out of jail free card. Because look, Dido swore an oath of chastity that she broke, so that's a sin, right? But Aeneas is not held to those same standards because his wife's ghost told him it's okay for you. So you see what I'm getting at here with Aeneas? Like, there are things that he does that call into question or would call into question his heroism, but Virgil is careful to embed before those actions take place, to embed in our minds the idea that, okay, well, this thing that would normally not be morally acceptable is acceptable because the gods want him to do it, because Hector said it was okay, because his wife said it was okay. Okay, I have a word for this. It's not a word, it's 3 words. Preemptive character rehabilitation. So we've got three. So we've got three terms here: character, right? Well, so in this, like in this usage, what I am meaning is how we evaluate the moral qualities of Aeneas. Uh, Rehabilitation, I don't think that needs too much explaining, but that means fixing or curing or bringing back to a certain standard. But it's the preemptive that's the key term here. What this means is before the fact. Okay? So, like, um, how can I? So let's say we get a vaccine for coronavirus, but you haven't had it yet. So you go out and get the vaccine because you want to get it. That's a preemptive measure. You're taking taking action so that the consequences down the road don't hurt you, don't harm you. So what Virgil does as a narrative strategy vis-a-vis Aeneas is he had, like, I've already given the examples here. Hector appears in a dream saying it's okay to leave. His mom also says it's okay to leave before Aeneas leaves. Because if those things don't happen, then Aeneas leaving leaves us thinking about his character. Like, what kind of hero is this guy exactly? Right? And the same thing with Dido. Right? Before he gets with Dido, who again has taken a vow of chastity, she's done the pious thing. Right? She took a vow of chastity. So, but Aeneas doesn't have to do that because his wife's ghost has told him it's okay for him to go out and find a new wife, which, as we know, will not end up being Dido. Right. Okay. So again, and the same thing happens in Carthage. Again, this goes back to Aeneas' sleeping habits. At 2 points, he's asleep, and Mercury, who in Greek is Hermes, but Mercury appears to him in a dream, telling him that, go, like, it's time for you to go. And I'll come back to one of those episodes in a later lecture. It basically says, if you don't leave, Dido's going to kill you. So he does. He takes the midnight boat out of Troy, quite literally, and he leaves in such a hurry that he can't even take his stuff, including his armor. That's So that's how panicked he is as he leaves. There is okay. Let me back up a minute. There's the hilarious episode. I find it hilarious. It's supposed to be heart wrenching, but the breakup scene between Dido and Aeneas when Dido finally confronts him, and Aeneas, in response, just runs through the series of bad breakup excuses. He says, "I'll never forget you. You say we're married. Where's the ring? It's not my choice. The gods want me to go. If it's up to me, I'd still be back in Troy. I wouldn't even be here in the first place." And then it's everything, but we can still be friends. Which, because of course, as the Roman audience would know, there's no friendship with Carthage. The Carthaginian, and okay, let me wrap up with Dido. And Aeneas runs off. Dido kills herself on top of a pile of Aeneas's possessions. Because she doesn't want anyone to know what her real intentions are. So she says this is a magic spell. This brings us back to Diana and her association with the moon. The moon and the moon's association with sorcery and witchcraft and women. Okay, so that wraps that up. But Dido's suicide and the burning funeral pyre that Aeneas sees as he looks off the end of his ship as he's sailing away, those are symbols of Roman conquest of Carthage, right? Which happened roughly 140 years before Virgil's writing this. So Virgil would know that like you're reading this Dido and Aeneas episode through the interpretive context of the what amounts to the, I would say probably what amounts to the Romans as their greatest conquest, their greatest military, because Carthage and Rome were equal powers in that. Because so Carthage is in the province of Libya. I think it's nowadays. I think it's Tunisia, the modern day country of Tunisia, but North Africa. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it's up there. And so they were rivals, and I'm going to stop talking about this right now because I don't want to keep you listening for too long, and I'm sure I will have an opportunity to flesh out the details on the Punic War uh, um, in another lecture. Okay, so take care of yourselves. I miss you, and bye.